A 4-year-old girl rode her tricycle into the yard. Her mother stepped inside for a few minutes to finish getting ready for work. When she came back out, her daughter was gone. The tricycle was gone. The yard was silent. And for 2 years, no one could explain what had happened. Not the police, not the investigators, not the 1,000 tips that poured in from across the country. The answer had been standing in the yard that same evening, offering to help search. And the only reason it was ever found is because a detective sat down at an Italian restaurant, ordered coffee, and said exactly the right things to exactly the right man. This is the case of Kali Ann Poulton, and it is one of the most disturbing and most quietly brilliant investigations you will ever hear about. Kali Ann Poulton was born on September 20th, 1989, in Rochester, New York. She was an only child, and by every account, her parents gave her everything they had. When Kali was 3, her parents divorced. She stayed with her mother, Judy. Her father remained close, visiting regularly, maintaining a genuine relationship with his daughter and a respectful one with his ex-wife. The separation was difficult, but the family held together around Kali in the ways that mattered. Judy had moved to an apartment complex in a quiet suburban area of Rochester. It was the kind of neighborhood that felt safe, tree-lined, fenced away from the highway, full of families. Other children played outside in the evenings. Neighbors knew each other. To save up for a trip to Disney World the following summer, Judy had taken on a part-time job delivering magazines to customers in the neighborhood. It was evening work. She would finish distributing, come home, and the day would end. On the evening of May 23, 1994, that routine would be shattered. Judy was at home that evening, sitting at her kitchen table inserting leaflets into magazines before heading out on her route. It was close to 6:45 when Kali appeared at her side and asked if she could go outside. It was a beautiful spring evening. There were other children in the yard. Judy could see them through the window. She told her daughter yes. Stay in the yard. Don't go far. Kali grabbed her tricycle and ran out. Judy had only a few minutes of work left. Her plan was simple. Finish with the leaflets, load the car, call Kali back inside, complete the delivery route, and then take her daughter to McDonald's when she was done. She carried the magazines out to the car. She turned to call Kali's name. The yard was quiet. No tricycle sounds. And Kali's tricycle made a distinctive creaking noise when its wheels turned on the pavement. There was nothing. Judy called again. She walked the perimeter of the yard. She went to the neighbors. She asked everyone she saw. Nobody knew where her daughter had gone. Within minutes, Judy's calls had drawn a crowd of neighbors, all of them joining the search. But Kali wasn't in the yard. She wasn't on the path. She wasn't anywhere. Judy called 911. Police arrived quickly. They were joined by firefighters and canine units. Officers went door to door through all 300 units of the complex, the manager providing spare keys wherever no one answered. The logic was straightforward. The complex was fenced from the highway. An outsider would have had to enter, locate a child, and leave without anyone noticing. It seemed far more likely that whoever had taken Kali was already inside the complex, a resident. But the search of every unit turned up nothing. No Kali, no tricycle, no evidence that she had been anywhere except the yard where she was last seen. By 4 o'clock in the morning, the case was reclassified as a kidnapping. A specialized unit took over. Detectives interviewed Judy extensively. They asked about Kali's father. Judy was certain he had nothing to do with it. They asked about anyone in her life who might wish them harm. They asked about anything unusual she had noticed among the complex residents. And that is when Judy mentioned Mark. Mark Christie was 22 years old. He had recently moved into the complex with his wife and their 18-month-old son. Judy had encountered him several times in the yard. He was friendly enough, but something about him had always felt off to her. The first time she noticed it clearly was when he looked at Kali and said she was very beautiful. People said things like that all the time about children, but the tone was wrong. Something in the way he said it made Judy's skin crawl. Then he had added something else. He said he had been watching all the little girls in the complex, and Kali was the prettiest. Judy had not known what to do with that. It was disturbing, but she couldn't point to a law it violated. She began avoiding him when she could. The next time they spoke, he asked her a question that she never forgot. He asked, if someone tried to touch Kali, would she tell her mother? Judy said yes, and walked away. She had stopped letting Kali play with his son, even in her own presence. But the complex was small. They still crossed paths, and on the evening Kali disappeared, shortly after Judy had gone outside looking for her daughter, she had seen Mark in the yard. He was coming out with his son, heading to the playground. She asked him if he had seen Kali. He said no. She also noticed something that registered only dimly in that moment of rising panic. His sneakers had no laces. Detectives brought Mark in for questioning. He denied any involvement. He agreed to a polygraph. The examiner detected no deception, and Judy's own account placed him in the yard with his son at the time Kali had gone missing, which appeared to function as an alibi. His apartment had been searched in the early hours. Nothing was found. No child. No tricycle. Mark was released. The investigation moved on. Detectives examined Judy herself as a potential suspect, a standard procedure she understood and cooperated with fully, even as the scrutiny compounded her grief. In the weeks that followed, information about Kali's disappearance spread. Billboards, flyers, local news, then national attention. Judy left her job entirely and dedicated every hour to finding her daughter. She printed flyers. She contacted media outlets. She raised $100,000 in reward money with the help of supporters. She appeared on The Oprah Winfrey Show. The case aired twice on a nationally broadcast program dedicated to unsolved crimes. 2 airlines agreed to include Kali's flyer in their ticket envelopes. Over 1,000 tips came in. Investigators followed every one. None led anywhere. The case went cold. For 2 years, Judy kept going, kept posting flyers, kept calling in, kept hoping. And the man who had taken her daughter continued to live freely, just 50 miles away. Before we go further, if you want coverage that gives cases like this the depth they deserve, you are in the right place. At Unresolved Years Mysteries, we follow the investigation all the way to the end. Subscribe now and turn on notifications. What comes next in this story is not something you want to miss. On August 9, 1996, more than 2 years after Kali vanished, a woman called 911. She told the operator that she had argued with her husband, that she had told him she wanted a divorce, that he had tried to change her mind by telling her how much he was suffering, how hard things had been for him. And then, in the middle of that conversation, her husband had confessed to killing Kali Ann Poulton. The woman was Mark Christie's wife. She took their child, went to her father's house, and called the police. When detectives heard her account, they faced an immediate and crushing legal obstacle. Under New York state law, communications between spouses are privileged. Whatever Mark had said to his wife in the course of their marriage could not be introduced as evidence in a criminal proceeding. It couldn't be used to arrest him. It couldn't even be used to justify questioning him further. The confession existed. It was real, and it was legally untouchable. Detective Crow, who had worked the original investigation and now heard Mark's wife's account, was not prepared to accept that. He drove 50 miles to the city where Mark had relocated. Mark's mother answered the door and told him her son would not speak to police without an attorney they had apparently already called, suggesting Mark knew his wife had contacted police. Crow stood at the door and processed the situation. A lawyer would shut this down entirely. Mark would be unreachable, legally insulated, free. As he was still talking to the mother, Mark himself came to the door. Crow did not push. He did not issue demands. He told Mark quietly that he simply wanted to ask a few questions. Nothing formal, nothing threatening. He suggested they drive to a nearby restaurant and talk over coffee. Mark agreed, on one condition. Crow would take him to his lawyer afterward. They drove to an Italian restaurant and sat down. For the next stretch of time, Crow talked to Mark the way you talk to someone you've known for a while. Relaxed. Unhurried. No pressure, no accusation. He let the silence breathe. He ordered food. He waited. And then Mark started talking. He said Kali's face had been haunting him for 2 years. He saw her everywhere, on flyers, on the news, in his head. He said what he had done had not left him alone for a single day. Crow listened. He did not react with urgency. He did not press. Instead, he told Mark something deliberately calculated. That Mark had, in fact, outsmarted an entire team of professional investigators. That was genuinely true, and Crow said it was something approaching admiration. Mark's response confirmed everything Crow had suspected about his psychology. He said he didn't want to sound like he was proud of himself, but the way he had gotten rid of the bicycle was, in his own words, truly ingenious. He asked if Crow wanted to hear about it. Crow said yes. Mark explained that Kali's tricycle had been in his apartment for 3 days after her disappearance. He had known the police would search every unit, and they had. But he had also identified a critical gap in what they were authorized to do. Officers searching for a missing child are permitted to look anywhere a child could be hidden. They are not conducting an evidence search. They are looking for a living person. That meant they could only open spaces large enough to conceal a 4-year-old girl. Mark dismantled the tricycle and cut it into pieces. He distributed those pieces throughout his apartment in locations too small to contain a child, folded into clothing inside closets, packed into small bags. Over the following days, he carried pieces out to his car in those bags and disposed of them at various locations far from the complex. Police had been stationed at the complex exit during the search, checking cars, but they were looking for Kali, not small bags. The pieces passed through unnoticed. Crow listened to this and understood something clearly. The level of calculation involved in that response was not the behavior of a man who had panicked and made a terrible mistake. This had been methodical, controlled, deliberate. He kept that observation to himself and kept his tone steady. Crow carefully guided the conversation toward what he actually needed. He floated the possibility, purely as a tactic, that perhaps Kali's death had been an accident. That perhaps Mark hadn't intended for things to end the way they did. Mark asked what kind of sentence he might be looking at. Crow told him approximately 25 years. Mark said that seemed unfair. He said 2 years of living with this had been punishment enough. He said his suffering should count for something. Crow agreed with none of it internally. But he kept his expression neutral and continued. He told Mark honestly, if he spoke to a lawyer before saying anything further, no attorney would allow him to confess to a crime for which there was currently no physical evidence. If he did that, Kali's family would never know what happened to their daughter. They would never know whether she had suffered. Mark looked at him and said, she didn't suffer. Crow said it was time to do the right thing. Mark told him everything. According to his account, Kali had come to his apartment door that evening and asked to play with his young son. He let her in. He brought her tricycle inside. He knew Judy would never approve of her daughter being in his home, so he didn't want to attract attention. Kali went upstairs to the children's room and began playing. About 10 minutes later, Mark heard Judy in the yard calling Kali's name. He panicked. He went upstairs, and he strangled his daughter. He went back outside, without laces in his sneakers, and walked to the playground with his son, deliberately positioning himself to be seen by Judy when she came looking. After she moved on to search the rest of the complex, he returned to the apartment. He placed Kali's body in a laundry basket, covered it with clothes, and carried it to his car. He drove to his workplace, a large industrial facility where he worked as a security guard. He had the day off that evening, but he told coworkers he had forgotten something and needed to pick it up. He parked at the back of the building, left the basket by the rear door, drove around to the front, entered through the main entrance, walked through the building, and let himself out the back. He carried the basket to a 30,000-gallon tank filled with liquid coolant. He opened the lid. He tied a heavy metal object to Kali's body, and he dropped her in. Then he drove home and joined the neighborhood search. Crow had doubts about parts of the story, specifically the claim that Kali had come to the apartment on her own and that the killing had been a panicked response to hearing Judy's voice. The missing shoelaces told a different story. Removing laces from shoes takes time. You do not do that in a panic. You do that when you have already decided what you are going to do, and you need a ligature. Crow believed Mark had lured Kali into the apartment deliberately, likely using the promise of playing with his son, knowing his wife was at work. He believed what followed had been an assault that Kali had resisted, and that Mark had strangled her not because he panicked at the sound of Judy's voice, but because he needed to prevent her from telling her mother what had happened. But Crow did not voice any of this at the table. He had what he needed. Pressing the point might have caused Mark to withdraw. When they were done, Crow paid the bill. Mark left a $2 tip, and then he walked with the detective to the police station, where he was arrested for murder. His attorney moved immediately to have the confession suppressed. The effort failed. Mark had provided every detail voluntarily. Detective Crow had not coerced him, had not made promises he wasn't authorized to make, and had not violated a single procedural rule. The confession stood. Police went to the industrial facility and opened the tank. 2 years after Kali Ann Poulton had ridden her tricycle into the yard for the last time, she was found. The condition of her remains did not allow medical examiners to determine cause of death or confirm other details. But her identity was confirmed, and Judy was finally able to bury her daughter. Mark pleaded guilty before the judge. Under a negotiated agreement, the kidnapping charges were dropped. He was sentenced to a minimum of 25 years for murder, exactly what Detective Crow had told him to expect. We are not done with this story. What comes next is something most people who know this case have never heard, and it connects directly to why Kali Ann Poulton's name matters beyond the tragedy of her own death. Drop a comment that says "still here," let me see who is with us, and hit like if this case is affecting you the way it should. In 2010, 16 years after Kali's disappearance and more than 2 decades after a separate killing, investigators reopened a cold case from 1988. An elderly woman named Viola Manville, 74 years old, had been brutally murdered while taking a walk in a suburb of Rochester. At the time of that original investigation, police had identified several suspects. One of them was a 16-year-old named Mark Christie, but he had passed a polygraph test and been cleared. The investigation had eventually focused on another man, Frank Sterling. Frank Sterling denied killing Viola Manville. He maintained his innocence throughout a relentless overnight interrogation. By the end of it, barely able to comprehend what was happening around him, he confessed. He was convicted. He went to prison. For nearly 2 decades he appealed. He insisted the confession had been coerced. He argued he had been pushed beyond the point of rational comprehension by the interrogation tactics used against him. Every appeal failed, until 2010. When investigators reopened the Manville case and submitted all available evidence for modern DNA testing, they found biological material that did not match Frank Sterling. It matched an inmate already in the system, Mark Christie. In 2011, Mark confessed to the murder of Viola Manville and received an additional 28 years in prison. He disclosed no motive. He showed no remorse. Frank Sterling was released after 19 years of wrongful imprisonment. He filed suit against the authorities and received a settlement of nearly $10 million in 2014. 3 years later, at the age of 54, Frank Sterling died of a heart attack. The arithmetic of this case is almost too painful to process directly. If the original investigation of Viola Manville's murder had not fixed on the wrong suspect, if the interrogation that produced Frank Sterling's false confession had not happened, If the polygraph Mark Christie passed at 16 had been treated as a tool rather than a verdict, Mark Christie would have been in prison in 1988. He would have been in prison when Kali Ann Poulton was born in 1989. He would have been in prison on the evening of May 23, 1994, when a 4-year-old girl asked her mother if she could go outside and ride her tricycle. The wrongful conviction of one innocent man created the conditions for the murder of a child. That is the full weight of this case. Not just what Mark Christie did, but what the system's failure to find him earlier allowed him to do. Detective Crow's work in that Italian restaurant was exceptional. Patient, calculated, and effective in a situation where the law had left him almost no tools to work with. He found a way. But the reason he needed that way, the reason Kali's case ever became the nightmare it became, is a different story, rooted in a different failure, in a different room, decades earlier. Kali Ann Poulton was 4 years old. She just wanted to ride her tricycle. She deserved better from every system that was supposed to protect her. Thank you for watching this all the way through. The Kali Ann Poulton case is one of the most layered, most disturbing, and most consequential stories in the true crime record, and it deserves to be known completely, not just in headlines. At Unresolved Years Mysteries, this is the only way we tell these stories. Subscribe, share this video with someone who follows cases like this one, and leave a comment below. Tell us what part of this story hit you the hardest. We read everything. We will see you in the next one.